Welcome, dear friends, to another series of short video lectures on certain key critical and literary concepts or topics. Besides discussing some major historical developments or occurrences that had profound impact upon the writing of literature, particularly the English literature. So I begin with discussing certain writings that were influenced by the two world wars which the world witnessed during the first half of the 20th century. So first I will talk about a new group of writers who emerged during the period immediately following the First World War. This generation is known as the lost generation. So first I talk about the lost generation. So by the end of the First World War, there emerged a group of American writers who were very prominent during the 1920s, and these writers were generally disillusioned by their war experiences, and they were frustrated by the American culture and the puritanical repressions which the society upheld. They were termed the lost generation, first by Gertrude Stein, who is believed to have told Mr. Ernest Hemingway, "You are all a lost generation." And remember, Hemingway used this quotation as the epigraph of his famous novel, The Sun Also Rises. A number of these writers became expatriates, moving either to London or to Paris or elsewhere in Europe. Say, for example, Ezra Pound, Gertrude Stein and T.S. Eliot lived out their lives abroad, even though some of the young exiles, they returned to America by the 1930s. The typical examples of the works of the lost generation include Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises and Scott Fitzgerald's Tender Is the Night. These are the best examples representing two expatriate groups who wrote under this label, lost generation. And if you look at the cases of Hemingway and Scott Fitzgerald, we can understand that both of them belong to a particular school called, the Jazz Age group. The Jazz Age group, very flamboyant, pleasure-seeking group. And, this title was popularized, Jazz Age was popularized by Fitzgerald's Tales of the Jazz Age. Also, the first generation war poets, they are also having certain affinities, or their writings have certain affinities with the lost generation. In order to overcome the Great Depression experienced in the 1930s, the American government, particularly the then President Franklin Roosevelt, initiated what later came to be known as the New Deal measures, a package for reviving the economy, which again resulted in some of these writers turning into radical politics and writing that reflects their anguish could be discerned during the late 1930s. Say, for example, the novels of William Faulkner, John Dos Passos, and John Steinbeck, and dramas written especially by American dramatists like Eugene O'Neill and Maxwell Anderson well reflect the kind of anguish these people experienced after the period of the First World War. That's all about the lost generation. Now I move to another generation of writers connected with the Second World War this time, who this group is better known as the Beat Generation. Beat Generation was a term coined by one of their leaders, Jack Kerouac. And the very title, Beat Generation, contains notations of beatitude or beatific, because they felt themselves beaten down and they were offbeat or down and out, sometimes dropouts from the society. This is a term which denotes a group of American writers, especially poets of the late 1950s, who were clustered in two places of America, San Francisco and New York. And they developed a kind of their own slang and a typical or idiosyncratic writing style, and they upheld attitudes that were very unconventional, provocative, sometimes anti-establishment and anti-intellectual and anti-middle class, because most of them belonged to the lower classes of the society and they hated the middle class values and mores. They were deeply influenced by the jazz music, Zen Buddhism, and Christian and Jewish mysticism. These writers led bohemian lifestyles connected with drugs, free sex, and permissive living. And they were almost anarchic in their writings as well as in their personal lives, and sometimes it provoked bitter hostility from the members of the society. All their writings expressed disillusionment with modern society, its materialism and militarism, and they all presented a radical critique of middle class values. Well, and these writers, these poets in particular, they popularized the practice of reading poetry in cafes or coffee houses and jazz clubs to the accompaniment of drums. Great works of this group include poems written by Allen Ginsberg, particularly his great poem Howl, which opens with the line, "I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked." This is the opening line of Ginsberg's poem, The Howl. And also the poems written by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, A Coney Island of the Mind, a great work by Ferlinghetti, and poems written by Gregory Corso. Besides this, we could find the element of the Beat Generation writings in the novels of its leader, probably self-styled leader, Jack Kerouac's On the Road. And there is something very special about this On the Road. It was famously written on a continuous roll of teletype. And it presents a world of dropouts from the American society, the post-war society. And also the novelist William Burroughs, his famous work, The Naked Lunch, is a typical example of the writings of the Beat Generation. The writings of the Beat Generation produced tremendous impact on the development of popular culture or pop culture, particularly the emergence of counterculture in the form of hippies, and were influential in the student uprisings of the 1960s. That's all about the Beat Generation. Now the third group of writers connected with the World War, which I am going to tell you, is the Angry Young Men, which is a name applied to plays and novels written by a group of British writers, not American writers, British writers of the 1950s, the post-war period. The works expressed a kind of bitterness and social disillusionment. The term is actually taken from the title of the autobiography of Leslie Pohl, which was titled Angry Young Man, 1951. The term describes the nature of the protagonists and authors of works like Kingsley Amis' Lucky Jim and John Osborne's Look Back in Anger, whose protagonist Jimmy Porter is the prototypical angry young man. But both of them, both Osborne and Amis, they denounced the term what is called angry young man. Other writers include Colin Wilson, the novelist, the celebrated author of The Outsider, John Brain, his Room at the Top, and of course John Wayne's Hurry On Down. These are major works connected with the angry young men of the 1950s. Alan Sillitoe is another writer, a famous writer, who wrote Saturday Night and Sunday Morning and The Loneliness of the Long Distance Runner. These are two great works connected with Alan Sillitoe, which can be a typical example of the angry young men and their writings. All these writers, they question the value of idealistic commitment in a world that appears to lack any worthwhile causes. Also, they challenged the bourgeois ethic of their society, the society of the 1950s or the early 60s. And these writers developed a new kind of hero, better say an anti-hero, who rebels against the establishment, rails against its constraints, and strives for individual freedom. They did not develop, at the same time, they did not develop a new kind of aesthetic or style of writing. Rather, they followed the traditional methods and forms and styles in their novels and plays. Playwrights like Osborne, they are of course connected with what is known as the kitchen sink theatre or kitchen sink drama. That's all about the three groups. So far we have discussed the three groups connected with the two world wars. First, the lost generation, second, the beat generation, and thirdly, we have discussed the angry young men. Thank you very much.